Great to have you with us, Sharath. Now you're a faculty on Network Capital. The EdTech Fellows loved what you had to say. Today, we are here to dive deep into some of the career choices that you've taken, because that's what we do on Network Capital. We host interesting leaders who've built their category of one, doing interesting things, and you're definitely one of them. So let's start from the beginning. Could you tell us about how you grew up and your early career?
Yeah, thanks, Utkarsh. It's such a pleasure to be on, and it's been so great engaging with Capital over the past months. Yeah, so I was born in India in Chennai, and two doctors who were there, and I come from a family pretty much of doctors. My grandmother was one of the first female doctors in South India, and I guess life was pretty much set out for me. I think in many regards that way around. My parents still had an adventurous spirit. So after about 4 years, I moved to the UK. They got jobs in the British NHS after they finished their training in India. And I remember at the beginning, though, the NHS was such a crazy employer. They had to work such crazy hours. I was looked after by grandparents in India for about a year and a half before moving out to join them. And when I joined them, it was very much like I think I had a whole coterie of people from taxi drivers who would take me to school, or neighbors who would literally open the door and microwave some tea and stuff for me when I came back from school. I think child safety standards were very different those days as well. But that idea of, I think of being in that sort of environment around a hospital was a really strong feature of my childhood. And my parents then decided to go to Saudi Arabia for 7 years. They wanted to save money to build a hospital, their own hospital in India, back in Chennai. And that took us to a really wild world as well, a fascinating one. My mom was the only female doctor in the whole city in called Jeddah, the second biggest in the country. And she had all kinds of interesting patients, right? It was a national health service, so everyone, but many Saudi princesses would engage with her services because they wanted a female doctor, and she's obviously also very good at her job. And I remember like things where, a black limo would come outside our sort of apartment, and, black plated, you couldn't see inside or outside. She'd be put in and she'd be whisked off. She couldn't see where she was going. And it would go to some underground palace, basically, where there was a royal hospital. She'd deliver the baby and then be brought, back in the thing later on at night, in the middle of the night. And the next morning, often someone would show up with outside as we came out of the house on the way to school. There'll be a driver outside with a package, and the package would have like a Rolex watch or something like that as a gift. You couldn't charge royal patients. So it was just a very surreal place to grow up. But what was really interesting there was, I was Indian, but I'd come from the UK. My parents were UK trained, and just seeing how they were treated differently from doctors who came from India directly, both in terms of salary, but also, honestly, also in terms of sort of dignity and sort of working conditions and so on as well. I think I became very aware of inequalities through my time there. And the other thing that was there, one of the wonderful things with this package they got was they were allowed to send their kids anywhere in the world once a year with a free ticket with the national airline. And so we'd go to Chennai, or then called Madras, every summer. And that, I think, was that connection to India that was something I think will always stay with me, that I would spend it with my grandparents. They were quite dull. It wasn't very exciting. India was quite sleepy those days, the 1980s. And there was I remember one TV, there was Doordarshan, pretty much that was it for TV. There was about half an hour English programming each day. But you kind of learn, I think, connecting with my grandparents, seeing India and seeing some of the challenges the country was going through, I think really stayed with me for a long time. So I think those years were very seminal years in my life, I think, as well.
That's fascinating. And then talk to me about your early career choices. Where did you study? I know you went to Cambridge and INSEAD, and then your initial career was a wide range of experiences. Tell us about that.
So when I came back from Saudi, so we were quite happy there. The Gulf War erupted suddenly. We came back to the UK, and it was a bit of a shock for me. And I talk about that in my recent book, Intrinsic. And just, the UK was a very different culture, weather, food, you name it. And academically, it was a step up from what I'd been used to. And I went to a good school in Saudi, a British school, but it was a step up going across. And I think I was rescued by a teacher in the school who was an English teacher. And I think he saw in me something that other people didn't see. And he was what I talk about in my book, a talent nurturer at the core. And it really helped me to get to places I wouldn't have got to otherwise. And quite literally, in this case, Cambridge, he literally forced me into the back of a car. I mean, I'm somewhat joking here, but it took me, waited outside admissions offices, and just asked me to consider applying. And I think sometimes, that confidence, I was good at English, and that confidence that he generated, that belief, it translated into many other aspects of my life as well. And I think about that really core behavior that he exhibited that got me into Cambridge. As you said, I started my career there. What was interesting is I changed school because he was such a good teacher. I got a scholarship to another school, and then I didn't study English at Cambridge. I studied economics. I got interested in that, and my parents were also on my case to do something a bit more practical probably as well. But even though, he still stayed in touch and was very, very encouraging of the Cambridge journey. So I think that idea of sort of really understanding early on that the role that talent nurturers have in our lives, I think was something, I didn't know those words, I hadn't sort of invented them, but that sort of aspect of it was a very, very important part. I think I was still deeply confused. So at Cambridge, I was really interested in development economics. Given my time in India, I had two fantastic tutors or supervisors there who have specialized that in my college, got very deep into it. And I was thinking about the World Bank or working something like that. I kind of sold out, I guess, and I went to join the world instead of a management consulting or strategy consulting specifically, joined one of the top tier strat firms. It was called Booz & Co. At the time. It's now called Strategy. And I think there was so much sort of peer pressure around Cambridge. There'll be the milk round, and every night there would be these fancy presentations in the in some hotel that give you a free dinner and some free wine. So as a student, it was very attractive to go and listen to all this stuff as well. I wonder now whether I had an amazing, initially 2 years with Booz & Co. I learned so much, and I got so much experience of life. I had a very sheltered childhood. I do wonder now whether was that the right thing to have started or not. That way, I still think it was, because I think the kind of experience, the travel, the range of exposure was amazing. And I had amazing nurturers around me in Booz & Company at the time, partners or senior managers who were very forgiving of me and would let me say stupid things in client meetings, or things that didn't make sense, or take a risk and so on. And they were very patient, I think, as well. So I think, I think they were very, actually very, very good, a very, very good first employer. And they knew that I was interested in development. And I actually, through one of them, had got to meet the CEO of ActionAid, a large international development charity. And he said, "Sharath, why don't you come and work with me for a year?" It was pretty much unpaid. I was just getting paid expenses and some basic living thing. But come and help me. I'm doing some stuff that's interesting in ActionAid. And Booz & Co. said, "Fine, go for it. We'll give you a sabbatical. Whenever you want to come back, come back." And that was very, very unusual, I think, in consulting firms and so on. So yeah, I do look back. I think our first employer has a big impact on our careers. And I was very, very lucky with mine. And I've now got Michaela in my team, who's, she's my first employee, and this is her first job after university. I hope I can be as good as they were to me, I think, in many regards.
Yeah. Talk to me about the concept that, you mentioned, talent nurturer, that gives you, a good grounding into the entire life. And also give us a flavor of the book Intrinsic that we are here to largely discuss. And hopefully we'll cover your career through the book.
Yeah, thanks, Krish. So I think the idea of talent nurturers, I looked at a whole range of fields for the book. So everything from sports to publishing to entrepreneurship to top chefs and restaurants to the business world, of course, and government. And what I found was that increasingly we're in this kind of winner takes all world, right? Where more and more of the spoils of any industry or field go to a few and not the many. And, I know you and I are tennis fans, and I was looking at tennis players, right? And Federer, I was saying in the book, got a $300 million deal from Uniqlo at the twilight of his career. Was 37. The top 120th player in the world barely breaks even. It's really difficult to make a living by the time you pay all the travel costs and coaching costs and so on. And I took my sister-in-law, to Wimbledon. She's not a fan, and I had to literally show her the difference between who the top 10 player was on the court, because you can't tell the difference if you don't know, who the player is. So even in an industry as competitive as that, where it's so meritocratic in a way, what happens is the winners do take most of the prizes. And I think the challenge with that is that it really affects our motivation, right? We're all vying for those top spots, and we see life as a tournament. And that becomes our mental model, right? So if you think about it, we think about, okay, I have to get that top spot at McKinsey or whatever it was, and they're only 5 places this year. That was the INSEAD conversation, right? I'm going to have to be better or smarter than the next guy or girl. The challenge with that, I think, is that that's actually not how the world works. The number of jobs, for example, is not fixed. We know that very conclusively from labor economics, where we should be having an abundance mindset talent where all of our talents could be nurtured and recognized. That's a key theme of the book. Instead of tournament thinking, how do we create these nurturing environments where all of us can find that unique thing we're good at and be different and stand out, but together create these talent ecosystems?
I think that's one area of overlap between our works as well. In the first article that I wrote for Harvard Business Review, I referenced finite and infinite games. And I think what you're arguing as well is essentially abundant mindset, infinite games, as opposed to my life only matters if I get one of those 5 or 10 spots. And I think research makes it really clear. The people who are constantly chasing spots excel at chasing spots, but not too much after. And I think it's so important for kids, for students, young professionals to understand this mindset.
Lukash, I love being at your book launch in London a few weeks ago. I remember you talked about this, and I really resonated with you. The idea you talked about, I think the mental model my parents gave me, and I think not because they are fantastic parents, but the sense of, like, I think you talked about this, but it's getting on this ladder of security and safety, right? That it's all about getting on the ladder. Once you're on the ladder, once you've kind of entered the tournament, life will all be fine. And I think you and I have both been talking about how, I'm 45 now. I think I'm a few years ahead of you at INSEAD. I know we both went to the same school, but a lot of my friends and classmates were mid-40s. We're losing our jobs, right? We're expensive. We're sometimes demanding of our employers. There are many younger people who are hungrier, maybe willing to work harder and perhaps more cheaply. There will be bumps in our life as well. And I think the value of an education, especially one of the fancy as school as INSEAD, should be to help prepare us for that zigzag of life, as I argue in the book. It's not trying to pretend life is going to be a straight line, no matter how lucky we've been in the tournament that preceded it, if you like, as well.
Yeah.
And I think that requires a completely rethink of our career structures, our career paths, and how we think about our career purpose more widely. And that's a key theme of the book as well.
Yeah. Talking about the zigzag of life, even though, I went to INSEAD really, really young. I was 24 and a half at the time. And I noticed that in my class, there were people who were 34, there were people who were 29 and different from all around the world. And despite such strong difference in culture, the zigzag paths was a commonality among everyone. What was interesting was that aspirations and change, go through so much of a shift as people. I remember in my 5th year reunion recently, I discovered that the conversations changed dramatically from what they used to be when we were students. How was it different? Have you gone back to INSEAD for your 10-year, 15-year or something? And how have you noticed this zigzag influence career choices, life choices, so forth?
Yeah, no. So I think we've got the same age. Younger than me, gosh, but and of course fresher face. But I was about 24 and a half as well. I think almost 24 actually when I started as well, and became 25 when I was there. Sure. So I was always a bit of a baby in the class also. And I think it was incredible, right? And I had the most amazing year at INSEAD. I learned so much. I met my wife, who happened to be in Paris. We met at a party. That was the best thing by far, of course. But what for me the most incredible thing was talking to former astronauts, journalists, Chinese forensic investigators, you name it. It was such an amazing zigzag of people who'd done these really interesting things before INSEAD. What I think happened, I don't think it's like the school's fault or anything like that, but the zigzag before INSEAD became a straight line afterwards, right? Everyone wanted to chase, these consulting, investment banking jobs, and now I think tech has also taken over. So Google and stuff are becoming that same sort of thing. But I talked in the book, I went back to Clayton Christensen, a Harvard Business School professor, and he'd written a brilliant book called How Do You Measure Your Life? And he taught many generations of Harvard MBAs. And what he observed is that many of them went into HBS with a clear purpose. They wanted to solve a social problem. They wanted to build a huge company to meet a real need in the world and so on. But what happened is that purpose, that sense of helping and serving others, that became replaced because of the business school education into a real focus on what motivation thinking calls hygiene factors, right? So things that reduce demotivation, but which don't deeply motivate us. So pay, of course, is an example. Working conditions, how fancy is the office? It's before the pandemic. The coffee machine, but also, frankly, the title, right? We all want to be the VP at Goldman. That's what will give us status in our peer group, or we want the McKinsey offer or whatever. That becomes the currency by which we measure our own value. And I think what he traced in the book quite brilliantly was that gets people, the story is always, we'll do that for 2 years and then it'll be fine. The challenge is that many people got on this sort of treadmill where they couldn't get off it once they started, right? Because they bought big houses, these cities, London, New York, whatever, they're expensive places to live, kids and so on. And then also, I think status-wise, it was really difficult to get off because their whole sense of value, their peer community, their sense of purpose, it all got aggregated towards these sort of huge and flashy kind of employers and their associated lifestyles. And I remember, I left consulting to go eventually to go found 2 NGOs, and it was tough. It was tough going to INSEAD parties, and someone would say, "What do you do?" That's the first question everyone asks, and you say, "I founded an NGO," and you get this really weird look, like you had some strange disease and so on as well. It took me a while to adjust my own mental models as well.
I think I would love to dive deep into the sense of worth, peer pressure, and career choices. So, what have you observed in your writing your book, the cases that you've studied, the wide number of people that you've cited? What have they done differently from most of us when it comes to making sense of the zigzag, meandering life that often happens?
So one of the things that really struck me when I talked to everyone from firefighters to bartenders, and so let me just tell one story of Kush. I was actually writing the book in a bar at the Condo, which is a private members club in London, and I was watching this couple together, and it was a middle-aged man and what looked like a teenage girl, probably thought his daughter, and the bartender was spending like 45 minutes with the two. It was quiet. It was a Saturday afternoon, and he was getting to taste and smell different spirits and drinks and concoctions. I think non-alcoholic for the teenage girl, I think. So I went afterwards and said, they left, and said, "What were you doing there? What was going on?" And he said, "Look, Sharath, they look like this guy was divorced. His daughter doesn't spend much time with him. This was his one and only chance to look cool in front of his daughter. And my job at that point was not to serve the drinks. It was at one level, but it was to forge that human connection and help her dad look cool in front of her eyes, right? And that was his purpose. It was to help and serve others. And the serving of drinks was only one part of that purpose. And so the people I found deeply motivated in whatever kind of job, right? I think when they have that real sense of helping and serving others, and they also have a fundamentally wicked problem they're trying to solve. By wicked problem, I mean something where there's not an easy technical solution. So if you look at, say, the Elon Musk getting to Mars on SpaceX, tough problem, but a kind problem. There was a way to program a probe to get to Mars, right? A few days after that, Black Lives Matter erupts around the world. Fundamentally wicked problem where racial inequality will never fully solve it, right? It's such a messy. So I think if we can find that wicked problem, we're never going to be out of a job. Robot can solve these things. We're going to have huge purpose because we're really helping you. And what's so exciting with this is that how we contribute to that problem may change over time. My work is all about motivation. It's ultimate wicked problem. And I started off running an NGO that tried to motivate hundreds of thousands of teachers in India and Africa and so on. Now I'm an advisor, writer, coach, if you like, consultant around the topic. My North Star is still the same, but I've evolved the how of how I contribute towards the solving of that problem. What matters is the problem becomes paramount, and I almost dissolve into the problem. So it's a bit like this follow your passion stuff that Scott Galloway and stuff. I think it's very self-indulgent. Instead, how do you follow your problem, not follow your passion?
Yeah, I like to say follow your curiosity. You're talking about following your problem. And I think they're a lot more instructive than passions, because I argue that passions change, passions evolve, but curiosity is a very pure emotion. Either you're curious about something or you're not. I mean, from the time I heard about your book, I have been curious about it. And of course, because we've been friends and we've been in touch for for a while now, but also the topic of intrinsic motivation is something fascinating. Tell me about the process of writing this book, the process of collecting these examples. But I think it's going to be hard to. If I could hire the bartender, I would hire today for network.
He found purpose from what he was doing, and I think he's gone to another bar now. Actually, I was just following up after the book, and he's doing really well. And I think I don't know where exactly in London, but a copy of the book was sent to him actually, which was really lovely. If he's listening out there, I hope he and me through his story. But yeah, it was such an amazing experience writing the book, Kash. And I'd never written a book before. I had a couple of unfinished novels that I wrote over the years that would definitely deserve to be unpublished. But I think for me, the idea of writing a book that really chimed with something I was deeply interested in and curious about, to use your words, I almost thought of it like a PhD sort of, dissertation. Instead of writing a PhD, let me write a book that hopefully is helpful to the world in some small way. And I was lucky to get a great agent and then a great publisher with Hachette and with an Octopus, who are the part of Hachette that I work with, have been a fantastic publishing partner. But the core thing for me was that I was so lucky to have great nurturers in my agent and my editor at Octopus, a lady called Claudia, who would let me have the vision of the book that I wanted. So I wanted to really write about this question of why do we feel so demotivated? Why are we in this motivational crisis? And what I was realizing was that all of these things were interlinked, right? You can't separate our working life from how we parent. And I spent time in many cricket pitches waiting for my son to finish practice, and I hear fathers shouting at their kids because they haven't bowled the googly in right the way, or haven't held the bat in the right grip, and they're living their lives for their kids, right? Because they themselves are not motivated in their work or their relationships or whatever. That's deeply unfair. And as I talk about in the book, it's into this huge crisis of anxiety and depression and even suicide among their own people. So I want to write a book that tried to bring all this stuff together, looked at, why are we so demotivated in the world of work? Why do we feel we can't have the careers that we want to and evolve our careers in the right way? Why do we find it difficult now to find the right partner, right? In the UK, for example, where we're both based, there's been a 20% increase in single households over the last 20, 30 years. Why do we find it hard to raise kids that really are curious and caring? And finally, why don't we have the leaders we deserve, right, in our countries? There were 5 really big questions, and my agent took it to Rachel, to a number of publishers, and many said, God, this is crazy. How can you address all of these things in a single book? If you want to write a parenting book like this, please tell us and we'll put it in the parenting box. If you want to write a business book, we'll put it in the business box. Octopus were amazing by being a nurturer, by saying, no, we buy into the vision of this. We'll make it the best version of this book it can be, but we're not trying to change what you're trying to write. And that's the difference between a nurturer and a manager at the core. A manager tries to mold the person, the talent owner, into their version of the world. I think a nurturer tries to help that person become the best version of themselves they can possibly be. And I think in that case, my publisher was an amazing nurturer. I went through 5 drafts of the book. The first one was before the pandemic, the last 4 after the pandemic. The hardest, it was really brutal. And I wrote it all, for me, it really was important to be in my own voice, even the audible version I recorded personally with the publisher. So that craftsmanship, that mastery of writing got a lot better over the 5 drafts. It was painful. But I was really lucky that my editor held me to a high standard. So there's that strong mastery element. But it was fundamentally the book I wanted to write. And I think it was the best version of the book I could write at that time as well.
I'm so happy to hear that. Let's unpack some of the topics that you've covered. Let's start with children. So Network Capital has a school for children in the age group of 8 to 18, and we run weekend classes to help them, with intrinsic motivation, and most importantly, to give them the tools so that they can figure out what they want to spend, a chunk of their life, the rest of their lives doing. And through your book, I got some tools of thinking about what language should parents be using with children? What should, parents tell their children about career, about work, about difficult times, and about motivation? So what have you discovered about this topic through your book research?
Yes, this really cut home, Akash. I think the single most useful insight I found in writing on parenting that I found in writing the book was this idea that children really listen to what we do, not to what we say. And I have a very close friend who just lost he's one of the mid-40s group we talked about. just lost a job. He's been there for 15, 20 years. He hadn't told his son about it for about 2 weeks after the news. And I was saying to him, look, I understand why you want to protect your son, right? But what does this tell your son? It basically says the moment something gets difficult, we feel we have to hold it in ourselves, first of all. We can't tell the people that are most important in our lives about something that went wrong or there was a vulnerability. It creates this this perception that we are perfect beings, that it's not okay to not be perfect, if you like. It has all of these problems. And I was really just reflecting, God, what a mess we've got into in our parenting approaches, right? And he's a wonderful parent. He's done everything possible for his kids, as provides for them. He does so many things. So I think we're caught in this trap of parents of trying to be people we're not fundamentally. And the one thing I'd say about parenting is to really, the role modeling we do matters so much more than we think, I think. So we know the zigzag of life and how difficult life is, how unpredictable it is. I mean, these 18 months have shown it very vividly. I think if we can show our children that's what we're dealing with and be open to them about our struggles. So during the book, a couple of publishers said no to the book. I would tell my kids. I applied recently for a very prestigious US fellowship. I didn't get it. I told my kids, I think it's really important for them to see you fail as well. And to realize, pick yourself up. Yes, you look a bit crestfallen, you're a bit quiet that night at dinner, maybe not your natural self for a day or two, but you pick yourself up and get back on and keep going. And I think if they learn that single thing for us, that's the most important. And everything we do, the obsession with the right school, the grades, all this crap, it distracts us from that core piece. And we don't focus enough on empathy and caring for our children and compassion as well. So it becomes this kind of transactional parenting relationship that we need to reset and rebalance, I think.
What are your thoughts on the schools of today? I'm not talking about a particular country. You've observed India, you've observed Middle East, Africa, the UK, perhaps the US as well. Can schools teach children to be intrinsically motivated? What would you do differently if you could redesign schools from scratch?
I think that's the one thing they should and must teach. They currently don't, because I think the systems that they're operating in, I think not because the leaders in the schools don't want to do it, but because they feel constrained by the system around them. And I think, this idea, again, going back to that ladder of safety, the idea of a school, giving you the qualifications to get on that ladder. I mean, we'll look at this A-level debacle we've had in the UK, or GCSE debacle. What a mess, right? This gold standard is nonsense. So what is much more important is to develop those muscles around lifelong learning, and to build on your curiosity point, that love of learning. I think if a child masters that in school and genuinely loves learning, whatever it might be, they're going to be set for life. Honestly, I think it's not going to. You and I both were in the world of that sort of corporate world. I remember consulting my first boss. He wouldn't ask me how many ping pong balls are there in the world or any of these silly consulting case studies. He just asked me to talk about something I was passionate about, and would just keep asking more and more questions. And what he was trying to drill for was, had I engaged deeply into that activity to develop the transferable skills of curiosity, communication, critical thinking, had I stretched myself, had I put myself on the line, had I taken risks, been vulnerable. His view is if you could do that in tiddlywinks or ping pong or whatever, or wine, you could do that in strategy consulting. And I'm more and more of the view that he was right, to be honest.
Yeah, Sharath, I can't wait to host you now on our school, because we have students from all around who come. And I have not heard one student from, our students come from different schools, top schools, talk about a subject on curiosity or intrinsic motivation. And that, I think, is challenging. Schools, unfortunately, have been designed like factories from the industrial era, and that needs to change. And I think your book does a pretty good job of giving people the frameworks that go in school and beyond it.
Thanks. And I think the factory, I fully agree with. I think one thing it's also done is the whole basis of our system as well is becoming increasingly extrinsic, i.e., basically what we teach our kids in school is do something because something else is promised at the end, right? There's the grade, the league table, whatever it might be, or the university entrance, rather than for the love of learning itself. And I spent 15 years in education, not because that's what I believe the purpose of education was. I believed it was to really uplift human potential and nurture young people and young minds and ignite them I think most of us in education know that's what we should be doing. I think we've just got to be a bit more pirate, a bit braver now, and
Hmm.
push back against our leaders and explain why these accountability systems, they sound great on paper, but what they've
Hmm.
really created is these kind of fear and compliance cultures that take our kids further and further away from what the world and what the job, the job market needs in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharath, your book also offers great techniques and tools for career changes. You yourself, an economist, or let's start with um, a development economics turned consultant, turned MBA, turned entrepreneur, turned writer, and you're in the midst of another transition. Uh, how does one think of intrinsic motivation in career transitions? Who are some people that you've studied, observed, or known who've managed to keep their intrinsic motivation growing with every passing year?
So I'm thinking really of, in this case, let me just use myself as an easy example, Kash, because I think when I started off in my career, I was very much driven by ego, being very honest, right? I wanted to feel like I was a good version of myself. And
Hmm.
I would feel like I'd be at some client meeting, do a really terrible job and be telling myself, no, 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 it was all about the client. And I couldn't, and it was, excuse my language, bullshit, right? But really what I wasn't able to do was to say, look, my ego needs to be subservient to the problem I'm solving.
Hmm.
And when I started working in the nonprofit sector, I had a great chair. His name was Joe, and he's got a book out soon. But one of the things I think he taught me was this idea that you don't always need to look the smartest person in the room. It's not about you. Helping other people um, fulfill their potential, that's what we should all be doing as leaders sometimes. And so strip
Yeah.
away the ego and sort of that sense of need to feel perfect yourself and almost, get lost in the problem. So but still, my God, it was the hardest 10 years of my life. I mean, I've never worked in India before. I'd spent time in India, but never worked in India properly, never worked with the Indian government. That itself was the amount of time spending in the corridors, trying to get things to move, but also meeting amazing leaders there as well. It was such challenging work. And, no one taught me how to do a government meeting. I didn't do some, government relations course somewhere. I did it because there was no one else to do it. I had to do it. That was part of my purpose. And you learn, right? You screw up, you make mistakes. But I think that element of almost being kind to yourself and saying, look, I'll be a bit more forgiving of myself as a leader, but all because I know I'm trying to get to this much bigger thing that's much bigger than me. It allows you to fail and not feel scared of that failure. It allows you to take risks
Yeah.
and go for it. And I think that's, again, trying to really dissolve into the problem. That's been the key insight for me about this question of how do you change careers?
Yeah. Have you ever dissolved yourself so much that you felt like you're losing yourself or the problem is sort of taking over your life?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think being very honest, those 10 years were tough personally. I think I have young kids, they're 10 and 7, and I missed a lot of my kids' childhood. I feel very guilty about that. I'm trying to now rectify that as well. But what I think was really interesting, the pandemic has obviously changed how we work, but I would go to India to meet, do 2 meetings. I'd also meet the team. But now I think we don't have to do that stuff anymore. So in some ways, I think I could have done a better job of challenging some of those assumptions. And many times where I was trying to meet, some funding conference where nothing came out of it, but I'd miss a birthday. Was that
Hmm.
worth it? Probably not. So I think that boundaries for myself, and I had a younger colleague at Stir. He wanted to take 3 months paternity leave, right? He's about 10 years younger than me. And I've got to say, I don't feel good about myself, but I did feel quite jealous for a few minutes. I thought, this guy, look, I made all these sacrifices for my kids. Why isn't he willing to make the same for
Hmm.
his? And just thinking about, what he was doing is right. He in a way was paving a better way. And I
Hmm.
should have listened to that as well, I think. So I think we can all learn from the younger generation some of this stuff as well.
100%. Sharath, talk to me about the process of writing. Like, do you have a writing schedule? Do you have a writing coach? How did you structure the book? Talk to us about that.
Yeah, to be very, very honest, it was literally whenever I could find time, wherever I could find time. I had a very full-on job when I started the book with Stir. I then ended up where I was transitioning to my work now with Intrinsic Labs, where I advise organizations, companies, to governments, to foundations on issues around motivation. But I was basically running 2 jobs and finishing the book off as well. So I wish there was some clean, romantic way. It was basically coffee shops at airports. I learned how to beg airports or airline staff to give me a slightly wider table. It was all economy, of course. So I could put the laptop on a table. I remember in Singapore to London, running for about 10 hours till the battery died. It was really crazy. It wasn't pretty, but I had wonderful, Claudia, my editor at Octopus Publishing House, was really patient with me. And the first draft was a complete mess, but she saw the sort of the diamond in the rough in it and said, look, show me how to help me. So she was a great sort of coach in that process. But for me, I think I wanted to rewrite the book in a way that was very personal. My voice is quite strong in the book, even though I really talk about lots of other people's stories and research. And so I think I really wanted to go through the journey myself and make those mistakes and expose myself a little bit. It was really tough, but I think at the end of it, I'm happy it was that kind of book.
Have your friends from INSEAD and Cambridge and Bose, etc., have they read your book? What are some reactions that you've got so far?
A lot of friends have, and I think it's been really great to see some of the feedback coming through and so on, whether it's Amazon or just informally. But I think one of the things I was really conscious about doing was trying to reset the book up to help us answer our own questions, not trying to provide easy answers to them. So I think everyone's answer on things like purpose or how to create autonomy in our lives or what should we master in our lives, etc., they're so individual, right? It's crazy for me to pretend to know the answer. But what the book I hope will do and it does do is to be an inspiration, a guide to say, this is the right question to ask at the right time of yourself, and gives you that reflective space to say, what does really matter in my life and as a parent? And it will be different for different people. The other thing I think the book tries to do is also help people make the change, because going straight from one approach to fully extrinsic or externally driven approach to one that's more driven on intrinsic motivation, it's a big change, right? So how do you break into small steps? How do you articulate the cost of what I call inaction, where the case for change? How do you de-risk it from the beginning so you don't make huge, bet the whole horse on things? These are some of the ideas I talk about in the book to make it more digestible and manageable at the core.
So you're a tennis fan. Tell me a bit about Djokovic and intrinsic motivation, or Federer and intrinsic motivation. And can you manufacture motivation towards something?
I think they're interesting. I'm a tennis nut for sure, Kasha, and they're interesting combo. I would argue, and again, it's really hard. I have to also say I'm not in either of their heads, right? So this is based on my sense and research and intuition. But I would probably argue that Federer has been more intrinsically motivated than Djokovic. If you look at him now, like he's almost 40, he still plays the tour. He's got a knee injury right now as we speak, but he loves the lifestyle, loves the playing, loves the stadiums, loves the connection. And I think that identity is a big part of his life there. And I think he could have retired many years ago, right? I mean, that money is clearly not an object anymore. So I think to me, he's an inspiration of someone who is intrinsically motivated. I think he's also a really interesting talent owner, because of course he won the 20 Grand Slam titles, but I think what he really did was bring tennis back to a sport that had grace and beauty at the core. And that, I think, rekindled the interest in hundreds of millions of viewers. And I looked at US Open prize money. We just finished the US Open. Now it's more than doubled, almost tripled over the last 15 years or so. I think largely because of Federer and what he did for that rekindling. And so for him, I think he almost superseded or went above the competition, the titles, all that stuff. He played the game in a way that was so compelling that people watched and became engaged. So that I sort of think of him in that way as a beacon of intrinsic motivation. I think Djokovic so far, I mean, that very challenging childhood in Serbia, went through a war, all of these things, an incredibly steely character. I think he's run his career on the fuel of extrinsic motivation, more like the diesel rather than the electric car. But he's gone to great places still, right? But it was so interesting, just literally days ago, right? This final happened. I was watching it, and late at night, he lost his chance to win the Grand Slam, a huge achievement if he'd got it. But I think he meant it when he said, look, this was the happiest moment of my life, because for the first time I've watched him in the US Open final before in person. The crowd was with him, and they saw him as a human being who was fallible, who was vulnerable, who was open. And I actually do think that in a way there was a sense of relief I could see in his shoulders on TV this time. And in his voice, he was in tears, right? And I think that it was almost like that motivational dial reset. And he's won, like he's already so far in his career. That gave me the optimism that all of us can change, right? Even someone as successful as him, we can still learn new tricks. We can still reorientate our motivational compass in our lives. It's never the cards are never fully stacked against us in whatever we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think your analysis is fascinating. We should build upon it in perhaps your next book or your next article. I also watched the match and the final moments of it. It was really interesting the way he talked about childhood and motivation. I'm not in a position to comment on extrinsic or intrinsic in his case. You know more about the subject. But it does seem to me that it's fascinating to study two really successful players. Look at their uh, context growing up and how that shaped their outlook towards the game. Federer grew up in Switzerland. His parents really encouraged him to take up a wide range of sports. In my book, I argue the chapter on Deep Generalists, which is largely about Federer. And then he, on the other hand, grew through a war, had a really traumatic childhood, a challenging childhood, and he talks about it that it shapes you in a way, and how motivation changes. That can be explained to used to explain a lot.
And I loved your section in the book around this and the book overall. It was just fascinating to read it, and I really enjoyed it as just so many like life lessons I picked up and reminders and new things to think about reading through. But I was talking to just a slightly adjacent parallel, if you like. I was talking to a lady called Nikki Anani on her podcast, and we were talking about family firms in Africa, right? A completely different topic, but I just want to show how these things link. A lot of the challenges, I think that you have these, she's based in Nigeria, these very successful Nigerian companies, right? Where usually the man has built something from nothing. It could be a mining company, it could be a pellet company, whatever it is. He's got a son or daughter, usually a son, where he wants to hand the business over to. And basically what he says to the son is, look, I have done all the hard work. Here's the boss's chair. Here's the leather chair in the boardroom. Sit down, just put your head down. Don't cause too much trouble and live comfortably. I've done all this hard work for you. The problem is that, what we learn about motivation is, what gets us to a certain point isn't what will get us to the next point.
Yeah.
And it's similar to the Djokovic story, right? That yes, if you're from war-torn Serbia, getting these Grand Slam titles, of course, that will drive us, those external record. But once you've won US Open podium or Wimbledon one, the effect diminishes, right? The next trophy feels less and less important. We've got to move the dial to more intrinsic drivers, these elements of purpose, the sense of what we do helping and serving others, autonomy, us being at the wheel, and mastery, us getting better and better. What happens too often in life, we wait too long for that dial to reset, and it's almost too late. But I think, as the Djokovic story says, I think if you're open to it, you can be in your 50s, you can be 20 and read Intrinsic. I hope it'll give you a way of making that shift, irrespective of that. As long as we're open to it and a little bit vulnerable, I think we can all make that change.
Yeah. What a fascinating note. Before I just close it out, anything that I should have asked that I didn't, or any parting advice for our audience? Our community members are CEOs and also 17-year-old teens figuring out what to do with their lives.
I think the big thing I'd say is really think about life as being integrated. I think too often we think about our work selves or our business selves, and we have this kind of serious persona that we try and play, and all of that stuff that goes with it. We're also, wives or husbands or girlfriends or boyfriends. We're parents. We're all citizens for sure, and we're also nurturers to others as well. What I think the book is unusual in doing, and I hope a really hopefully engaging read for that reason, is that it tries to bring all of these things together and look at our motivational dial holistically. Because again, going back to that cricket example I used, if one part of our lives is not right, we won't get our whole life. We won't be our whole selves and we want to be. So I think read the book not as a business book, but a book about how we can live a more fulfilling and motivated life, and hopefully a more successful one. But the success being about how we define it, not how the external world defines it. I think if we do that, I think we're going to live really, really fulfilling lives, and I think create a better world through the process.
Yeah. I mean, Sharath, you should absolutely be taking some lessons in schools and colleges. This is much needed for the world that we live in. I strongly recommend the book. It's wonderfully written, and I'm so proud to, have you on our platform to share your lessons about your career and life at large. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Prakash. Real pleasure.